Hi there. It's Mother's Day. I hope you're treating your mother well whenever you watch this. So we're going to end the year kind of where we started it, looking at what happens to your lunch in a couple different ways. Okay. I got little Charlie here looking through the refrigerator when he was about 1.5 years old. Very industrious. Here we go. So you have, you're going to get food in, right? Like this lady here having a great Mother's Day, right? Then you're going to digest it, absorb it, and then eliminate stuff that you can't digest. And so we're going to hit a couple of those today, like these two. I mean, on this set, and then we got one more set of slides after that. Okay, so why do you need to digest your food? We've talked about this. In fact, this was a big part of our class, especially early on. For that food to actually do you any good, it's got to get out of your stomach and intestines. It's got to get into your system and then into your cells. And most of what you eat in food is polymers, like proteins and big polysaccharides. And they're simply too big to get through membranes to get into your cells so your cells can do something with them. You are eating lunch for your cells, right? That's what you are. You're made of cells, okay? And then even if they could, these big macromolecules, right, that were part of a broccoli or part of a, chicken or whatever, they're not exactly the same usually as the ones that you need. So what you're going to do is break down these big molecules like proteins, right? See this cricket pie here? I actually made some of those in class one time long ago when you could do that kind of stuff. You break down proteins from a broccoli plant or a cricket or a chicken or whatever, and then you put those amino acids back together to make a protein that's you. You literally, again, are what you eat. So, just real fast, if this was the OC time, we'd really focus on this, but we're going to break the carbohydrates down into monosaccharides. We're going to break the fats into fatty acids and glycerol, proteins into amino acids, and nucleic acids into nucleotides. We don't think much about DNA and RNA being part of our food, but it is. If we eat something that's made of cells like that broccoli, then it's got DNA inside there and RNA. So if you're like this is the kind of thing that's kind of like a jellyfish. In fact, it's quite a bit like a jellyfish. It's called a hydra. It's just stuck to the ground, but it's got tentacles and everything. It brings food in. That's ingestion. It digests it in here, and then the undigested stuff, it shoots right back out through the same opening. That's like eating and then throwing up. But things like you and I have a complete one-way digestive tract. Alimentary canal is another word for that. Simply gut is another word for that. And being able to keep food moving in just one direction allows for different parts of that tube to become specialized into things like stomach, small intestine, da 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 da. So here we have all these different kinds of animals that have this one-way digestive tract, right? But what we're going to look at first is, again, the fact that when, for instance, this little clump of leaves that this grasshopper ate is inside this tube, it's not really doing them any good. All that molecule stuff has to get outside here. So it's got to get broken down first and then absorbed. That's what absorb means. Get out of this tube and into all the other cells. So here's what your tube looks like, more or less, right? In different people, that some parts are not totally in a different place, but things get twisted around here quite a bit. But you got, again, this opening. You got a tube. It gets a little bigger. It bends around a whole lot. Then it gets a little bigger again, bends around like that, and then you got an opening at the other end. So all these different parts we'll talk about a little bit. Most of them you're familiar with, at least to some degree. So we're back to digesting again, right? We're talking about enzymes catalyzing that kind of chemistry we call hydrolysis, right? And that begins right away in your mouth, where one enzyme in your saliva breaks down the starches that we call amylose into smaller polysaccharides, smaller pieces, and maybe even the disaccharide we call maltose, which is two glucoses stuck together, right? but no fats and no proteins are digested here in your mouth. So when we get to your stomach, now we have some acidity, which activates this enzyme called pepsin that breaks peptide bonds to break down proteins. But only proteins get broken down in your stomach, because that acid in your stomach denatures the amylase enzyme that was in your mouth and comes down to your stomach from your mouth. So the digestion of carbohydrates stops there, only proteins. No fats have been digested yet. We've been to mouth and we've been to stomach, no fats digested yet. But then we get to the small intestine. The small intestine is where by far the most different things happen in the digestive system, where we have all different kinds of enzymes of all types, the kinds that break down proteins, the kinds that break down lipids, the kind that break down carbohydrates and nucleic acids, and they're going to hydrolyze everything right down to the monomers. What we call final digestion here is accomplished in the small intestine. So here we have this idea, stomach, right? Little protein digestion here. Then we get into the small intestine, and one of the things that happens in the small intestine is a basic, alkaline and basic means the same thing. Solution gets secreted in there that neutralizes that acid. So now these other enzymes can work. The pH is right around 8, 7 or 8 or so. And then enzymes come from the pancreas through a little tube here. A thing comes from the liver, maybe hanging out for a while in the gallbladder. That stuff called bile is not an enzyme. It's like soap. It then breaks apart fatty things, which is what soap does, right? And so that's why you wash your hands with soap. It can break apart fatty things, and one of those things is the coronavirus and viruses like that are covered in a layer of phospholipids. Okay, so now all these things pour into here, including enzymes from the wall of the intestine itself. And again, we have all this stuff getting broken down, final digestion. So here's just a bunch of the enzymes. You don't need to know any of those specifically, but we talked about that one. We talked about amylase, we talked about pepsin, and then we got all these different ones again, all different names, all very specific, all coming into the small intestine doing all this final digestion. So that's the last picture again to wrap everything up. We're in the small intestine, where our next slide is going to take a look at what else happens in the small intestine, and that is where by far most of the stuff that's in your lunch actually gets out of this tube and gets into you. And so that's where we're going to pick it up next. And then after a lot of that happens, that stuff we call absorption, then we'll pick up what happens to what's left over in the large intestine. So when I was a little boy, it was like you didn't go swimming 30 minutes after you ate because you get cramps and you'll drown. Well, that was one of those old wives' tale kind of things. The cramps that you don't want to get when you're in the water are a kind of a big muscle cramp, not a stomach kind of cramp that you might get from doing stuff after you eat, which has to do with several different things. And so that old wives' tale, you still hear it a little bit these days, but not too much anymore. Part 2 coming up.